Hey friends, it's Simon Hurley and welcome to a brand new video. Now in the past I've done some Reinker techniques using a gel press and I love how those backgrounds turned out. You can watch that video in the top right corner up here. But today I'm going to be taking my Reinkers and doing some different techniques, not using a gel press, so if you don't have one, these are the techniques for you. You can create some really awesome colorful backgrounds. So without further ado, let's get into it. Alright, so today we're doing some different techniques using the Simon Hurley Create Reinkers. So for this first background, I chose 4 different colors that were kind of a little bit lighter from my line. I wanted to go with some more Eastery kind of pastel colors. And I'm just going to take them and put them down onto my craft sheet. So straight down, a little bit of color goes quite a long way with this. So then I'll go in and spray it down with a little bit of water, which is just going to kind of move those around just a tiny bit. And then I can go in and dip my stark white cardstock into there. Now you'll notice with the Reinkers, you get kind of more darker saturated areas than you would with just dipping your ink pad in. And it gives a little bit more variation. Now the background looks like a hot mess at first when it's first laid down, but I'm going to go into my heated craft tool here and just dry this down. You could of course let it air dry as well, but once these backgrounds dry out, they are so much more stunning. It kind of smooths out into the surface, but I love that there's still that definition of where that darker color was from when the Reinker was laid down. Now I'm going to be using these exact same colors for this next background, lay them down onto my surface here, and then I'm going to go in this time with a little bit of water, and then I'm also going to go in with a Brayer here. So instead of there being super solid color, this is another option for you. I'm going to go in and just kind of smooth out the color with my Brayer, wipe it off in between going to each color, and this is just going to make it so that you don't have as defined of colors. You'll see when I dip my cardstock in here, it's a lot more pastel and smooth all the way across. I ended up using this background, but it wasn't quite the look I was going for. I do love that kind of definition you get when you just leave the Reinker down. Now here I'm going in with a couple of darker, more vibrant colors from my line, and this is where you really see the action. So instead of just going in lines here, I'm going to kind of lay the Reinkers down in little sections of color, making sure to kind of put the colors together that are going to blend best together. And then once I'm done with that, I'll go in with my spray bottle again and just spray down a little bit of water. Now for some reason, these darker colors really kind of wicked out and created some really cool effects when I added that water down to it, since my inks are water reactive. And this time, instead of dipping it in and kind of smooshing it around, I decided to just lay my stark white cardstock into there, and this was enough for 2 sheets of cardstock. So once I lift those sheets off, you see those really awesome, vibrant and dark concentrated areas of where those lines of Reinkers are. So that's why it creates a totally different look than your normal ink pad would just on a surface like this. Now I love how these backgrounds look. It's a little bit kind of stunning at first when they're still wet because they're so vibrant and concentrated, but once you let them dry or heat set them, they tone back a little bit, they kind of smooth out and blend those colors together. But I love the look of this one where we kind of added the colors randomly and created that really beautiful effect. Now, for the rest of the ink that was sitting on the surface, I decided to just go in with a little bit of water, spray that down, and then start dipping my cardstock into it again. Now, in between each layer, I'll dry it off, and then I'll go back in and dip that color in, and this is how you're able to add some different texture. By drying in between the layers and dipping it back in, you get some really cool results, and this is just a great background that you could use for die cutting out of, or things like that. For this next background, I'm going to go in with some different Easter colors, so some pinks, yellows, purple, and green, and I'm just going to go in kind of a zigzag pattern here. Now for this background, I decided I wanted to use a little bit of perfect pearls to add some shimmer and shine to my background. So I'm going to grab a little bit of the gold perfect pearl powder, take a little piece of paper as kind of a scoop, and just dump some here and there. A little bit of this powder goes a really long way. So here I'm going to spray it again so that it reacts with water nicely, and if you want to, you can move around that perfect pearls a little bit, but I decided to just go right in and kind of smoosh that down onto the surface with a piece of cardstock. And there you'll see that background. Again, if I want to fill in some of the extra white space, I'll just dip it back in, but you get those really cool kind of zigzag patterns as well as that really awesome pearl. And then once that background's kind of mixed together, I can just dip it in at random and get a really cool second background that's not as defined, but still really stunning in the end. Now once those are totally dry, you'll see the one on the left with the more defined edges, the one on the right that's just beautiful, and then you really get those awesome gold shimmer in there too. And that's not going to wipe off because Perfect Pearls dries with that water. So now to finish off these cards, I'm going to use the He Is Risen stamp set from Simon Hurley Create. This is one of my newest sets. And I'm just going to start off with that larger cross with flowers image and stamp that down in some jet black Archival ink onto my white cardstock here. Now I love doing this in my MISTI because it's a bigger image, and if I need to, I can stamp it twice to make sure that it's perfect. Now I love using jet black Archival ink because it stays wet just long enough so you can throw over a layer of clear embossing powder and heat set that until it's nice and clear and shiny. And I love that finished look, but it'll also hold in watercolor really nicely. So now in that stamp set, I also have a large solid wood grain cross that you can stamp on top of this to fill it in, which I think is so much fun and it makes coloring a lot easier. So I lined that up and I went in with a little bit of Gur ink, which is my brown from my line, and I'll stamp that down right onto the cross. And that just makes it so easy to color that in and gives it a beautiful texture. Now I wanted to go in and add a little bit of shading to this, so I rolled my ink pad onto all 4 edges, and you can use a blending tool for this too if you want a little bit of a softer result, but then I'm able to stamp it down and it just gives a darker look in those 4 corners, which I think is so beautiful. Again, if you want it to be a little bit more subtle, go in with a blending tool and do that same thing and you'll get a beautiful result. Now for my watercoloring, I'm not going to show this too in depth, but whenever I do my watercoloring, I smoosh my Simon Hurley Create inks onto my craft sheet so it creates a little palette. And then I'll go in with my brush here and a little bit of water. I always start off with a little layer of water before I go in with my color. That's going to help blend the color and make sure that it doesn't seep into the surface right away. It gives it a really good blending time to move on the surface. And then I just go in with my color and start blending it down. Now I prefer using just a regular paintbrush like this and using my water on the side. It helps to kind of control it, and that way if I want to use more water, I get a little bit of a lighter color for kind of the first layer, and then I take a little bit less water when I want a little bit of shading, and I go in with the exact same color, and you're able to add that darker color in because you're not using as much water. So just a regular paintbrush gives you the most control. So there it is once it's all nice and colored in. I'm going to then just spray down that palette of color and just dip some stark white cardstock into it. This again just creates a really beautiful kind of pastel background that you could use for the rest of your cards. And I just love how that looks, so you can definitely use that for some die cutting. So I fussy cut out that cross quickly and I'm going to add it down onto the first background that we created with the lighter pastel colors. And then when I'm doing my sentiment, I always recommend taking the stamp set, and since they come on clear sheets, you can just kind of move it around and test out which sentiment's gonna work best. I ended up using the Happy Easter sentiment, and I'm gonna stamp this down on a little bit of vellum. So I did it with some clear embossing ink, and then I'm going to throw over a layer of white embossing powder, and that's gonna give a really nice sentiment that'll stand out on the background. Now I cut that out from the vellum, and I'm going to add it onto the center of that cross. That vellum just helps to kind of not cover anything up, but make the sentiment stand out really nicely. So there that is. I love that Reinker background. It almost looks like kind of tie-dye with the more concentrated areas and the softer color, and that cross is stunning. So now for this next background, I'm going to use one of those kind of more vibrant backgrounds that we created, and I wanted to get rid of any of that white area. So if you have any backgrounds like this, I recommend going in with the exact same color that you would use for that area, and just go in and kind of lightly blend over top of it. It'll make those whiter areas softer, but it won't cover up any details since these inks are nice and translucent, so it'll just add extra color to the background. Once that's done, I wanted to add just a little bit more texture, so I went in with a little bit of water, and that reacts and kind of lifts up a little bit of that color. Now when you're using inks and you want to do a little bit of embossing, you want to make sure to heat set all of that ink. It might be dry to the touch, but it could still have a little bit of moisture on the inside of the cardstock. So I like to heat set it dry, and then I like to test my embossing before I do anything. So I throw over a layer of embossing powder. If anything sticks, I go back to heating it, and if not, we're ready to do embossing. So I'm going to go in with that exact same cross image. Here I'm going to move it around a little bit until I find the exact spot that I like with all the different colors on it. And then I'll lay that down in my MISTI stamping tool, ink it up with a little bit of clear embossing ink, and then stamp it right down onto the background. And again, I like doing this in the MISTI just in case if I need to redo it over. Now I'm going to throw over a layer of my white embossing powder, and since we did all that heating early, nothing's going to stick to it, and then we can heat set that until it's nice and white on our background there, and that just gives a beautiful white image. Now I'm going to go into the background that we're creating and just use this splinter background. This is one of my first stamps that we did. It's a wood grain background stamp and I just love it. So I'll ink it up with a little bit of woof ink, which is my gray from my line, and then I'll take a piece of perfect gray cardstock and lay it onto that background and give some good pressure. If you struggle giving some pressure, a brayer is a really good way to add some pressure down to make sure that every part of that background stamp is going to transfer beautifully, and there we have our tone-on-tone stamped image. Now I wanted to add a little bit more shading to it, so I went around the edge with the exact same woof color of ink and my blending tool, and I'm just going to blend the edges, which makes the edges darker and it draws your attention to the center of the card. Added the He is Risen stamp from that same stamp set, and there we have our finished card. I just love the kind of bright, bold colors and the cool new way to use that cross image. Now for the next card, I'm going to be using a new image from that same stamp set. This one, it just says Risen in a nice font there, and then it also has those flowers kind of peeking in and out of the stamp. So again, I'm going to throw over a layer of clear embossing powder after stamping it in jet black archival ink, and then heat set that until it's nice and shiny. Now this one too has an image that fills in that risen word. So here I'm using a little bit of my new color Sidewalk chalk, and I'll stamp that down to give a really nice colored in image. Now I kept this in my MISTI because I wanted to add a little bit of shading to the bottom of it. So I went in with the exact same ink pad here, and I'm just going to kind of ink up the bottom edge by rolling my ink pad onto it. And I'll do this several times, maybe for 4 or 5 different layers, and then you're able to get a really nice shaded image with the exact same ink pad by just layering it up. So that we have a darker area on the bottom. I really love that most of the larger images like this word and the cross have some stamps that you can use to fill it in, but then you're able to just go into these smaller little flower images and color them in pretty quickly. I'm only going to show a little bit of the coloring here too, but I did the exact same process as I did earlier, adding down a little bit of water first, then I'll go in with my color from my Simon Hurley Create ink pads, and then I'll go in with more color but less water, and you're able to add in a little bit more shading that way. I love showing these tips because a lot of people have told me that it's really helped out their watercoloring, so try doing things in that order and I hope it'll help. Now next I'm going in with this really awesome cover plate die from Altenew. I just love all of the amazing detail in this, and I'm going to use this cover plate die to easily finish off one of my backgrounds. So I'm just going to add a little bit of liquid adhesive onto the back of that die cut and cover the whole thing. You could use kind of a spray adhesive for this as well if you wanted to go a little bit quicker, and then I'll add that down over top of my background that we created. Now once that's all complete, I'm going to take the Risen word that we just colored in, add that on some foam tape, and put that into the center of the card. I used a little bit of liquid adhesive too so that it sticks down really nicely. And there we have that all nice and finished. That die cut really finishes off the background, and I love that big Risen word with all those flowers peeking out of it. Alright, I hope you guys really enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a comment down below letting me know which one of these cards were your favorite. I always love hearing from you guys down there. And also be sure to give this video a big thumbs up and hit that subscribe button down below so you never miss another card making and crafting video like this one from me. Alright guys, I'll see you very, very soon. Bye!